we're here for the talks, and I think it's about time to then head into our next talk, which is a panel about what are the best ways to use tools to bring data into design. This panel will once again be moderated by Oscar Clark. So I think Oscar will be added to this room in a moment. There he is. Oscar has no less than 4 panelists on this one, so that will be
I'm spoiled this time.
Yeah. I see there.
I'm going to get them all to come on board straight away. Yeah, so it's kind of funny actually, Martin, because one of the comments made in the previous panel was about we have too much data. Hey guys, you know, we rely too much on data, so I'll hopefully try and answer some of those thoughts in this session too. So again, thanks for the intro. Hi everybody. So yeah, we're going to be talking about data and what's the best way to bring data into design. Let's start off with getting you all to introduce yourselves. So Jasmin, do you want to start, just describe who you are, what you do, and in particular in terms of your interest in design and data?
Absolutely. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah.
Perfect. So yeah, my name is Jasmin. I'm a senior UX designer at Mainframe Industries. We are in the very early stages of creating a cloud-native, massively multiplayer online game. And I've worked really many years on mobile live games where working with data was part of our daily practice.
Great. Emil?
Yeah, hey everyone, nice to be here. My name is Emil. I work as a product manager at Funday Factory. We're a mobile game studio based in Aarhus, Denmark, and we've basically transitioned from doing a ton of work for hire stuff for larger clients like toys and games and kids towards doing our own sort of free-to-play games. It's been quite a journey that I could do like a separate talk about, but my role as a product manager, basically I started as a programmer, then transitioned into had a brief stint as an artist, believe it or not, then a producer, and I'm a product manager. And I'm lucky enough to head a team, a tiny team, but a great team of like data analysts and our own in-house UA department, which is fun. So yeah.
Programmer art is never normally synonymous with great stuff, but I'm sure that wasn't the case with yourself.
No. I realized the error of my ways, and I was definitely better here than doing actual code. So this is better for everyone.
Miloš. Oh, you're on mute, Miloš. You're on mute, sir. If you check on the, yes, it go.
Oh, sorry. Now you hear me. Hi everyone. I'm very excited to be here. My name is Miloš Endrle. I am founder and CEO of Geewa, company behind few billiard games. Maybe you know Smashing 4. And as a founder, for me was a huge challenge to combine creativity and data together. The way works together, what I think will be very interesting to talk with you guys.
Cool, and Max.
Awesome, a pleasure to be and meet all of you guys. A shame it's not in person, but you know, do what we can here, all team. So I'm Max. I'm a level designer. I've been in the industry for about just shy of 7 years now, and I primarily work with data to help improve my levels, as well as the design decisions that go behind them. So yeah, that's me. Pleasure again to be here with you all.
Cool, great stuff. So let's dig into it. So, I mean, why do we care about data? And what did data ever do for us anyway? I mean, one of the reasons that I think it's interesting to ask is because I was in a session earlier, we were talking about outsourcing and workflow, and it just came up. And Chris from Booms Up said, yeah, we rely too much on data. Data's not as important as... Now, what do you think? You know, is data important, and why is it important, and what's it for? Jasmin, do you want to start with that?
Absolutely. So, I mean, the first thing to note is that, you know, data and analytics are first and foremost, it's a tool. It's not the single, it's also not the single only tool that we are using. And everything that we are using is to help us to make an informed decision, right? And we also want to learn about that if we made a decision, that how did it perform in a certain way? Like, did it do the things that we wanted it to do? So in that, that is where, you know, data comes in as a tool, basically, to help us to verify and to measure, you know, what have we done, and did we, you know, hit certain targets. But, you know, it's not you can't, of course, rely only on that. And there are just certain risks you sometimes need to also take to maybe make something new and to see. But again, you know, to see if it works, you do need to preferably use data in your day-to-day life, I would say.
Emil.
Yeah, I agree. Data is one tool in the sort of belt of tools we have available to us as developers. And I think I actually listened to Chris's talk, and I think he does have a point that if data becomes fetishized to the point where it's like the end-all be-all truth of the entire game, like then we've lost something along the way, something important. I think data is something that should trigger interesting discussions between your designers, your artists, your UX designers. And of course, in terms of me as a product manager, I also need to look at sort of, are we looking at data the right way? But in order to answer that question, data can ask the questions, but you need the entire team to bring in their expertise to actually bring out a potential answer to that, because it's a complex questions that the data often ask us.
Yeah, and I think actually that's the key thing there, isn't it? It's like we don't want to fetishize data for data's sake, but we do want to know what questions we want to ask. And I think understanding, you know, what we're asking and what we expect from that answer before we check the data is as important as the information itself, I suspect. I mean, Miloš, I mean, do you agree with that, or have you got a different way of looking at it?
I fully agree with you guys. It's at first only tool and how I'm using. Without data, we are blind. Then we have ideas from the beginning as a designers, as a developers, as artists, and we are checking in the data if these ideas are really come to point to end customer, to player, if they understand right. And I think data is amazing how develop all this new cycle behind free-to-play games, when we now developing from concept, prototype to production, soft launch, when are very important to decide, okay, let's follow up or not, and to global launch. Then these are behind whole new development cycle of the games, which is now used in free-to-play model. But again, it's only tool, and on the beginning you need this creativity and human brain come with something new, something innovative.
I actually think it's not just about free to play. I mean, I obviously I'm a big free to play fan, but actually what I realized is when I first kind of really saw what people could do with data in games was when I was at Sony and I saw the guys working on Killzone 3 and the work they did with heat maps, seeing where people were, seeing where shots were taken and where hits were made, to see kind of the timing and the movement around a space. You couldn't have guessed that. You actually had to see what people did, and seeing heat maps on a map. I know it doesn't sound like the most complicated, sophisticated thing right now, but it had a profound impact on the ability to design a better play experience, not just one that was about getting more money. I mean, Max, I mean, you know, as a level designer, is that something you think is important? I mean, or are you looking for other qualities when you're looking at data?
Well, I mean, you all raise like great points, and Miloš, you said it very well with like it being part of like prototype stages and stuff, because when we're saying data, this covers like a broad spectrum of what type of data, how you perceive the data. Emil, you mentioned about like, it's how we look at the data, right? And that's all comes from when are we playing it, or should we say when is someone playing it? From my point of view, the biggest data that I take in is from watching play tests. You know, sometimes we'll have like player research labs where we'll get people who've, you know, come off the street, not literally, but have signed up and they've come to test that. And what you need to look at is how are they playing it? What is the state that they're playing it in terms of the game? Like, what are the controls? And all of that starts to feed into it. And it's about like, how do we digest and take that? Because what actually might be an issue, you mentioned heat maps and saying about like the player was looking over in this direction. Well, what could be is that they were looking over in this direction because of the level design, or because there's something maybe not functional with the controls at the time. Yeah. So there's so much to take in. And like, I agree with everyone. It's about like how we use it and how we consume it, because we keep saying data, but like there's so many ways that data can be used, so many ways it can be interpreted. And it's about like saying is how do we get the information? I think it's obviously be helpful if you're present. If not, people like Jasmin in the UX design are there to help digest it, relay it onto myself and the team as well. So it's about, there's many things that go into it, but like for me, yeah, it impacts my job on many different stages in terms of creating levels.
But it's interesting, I think, because you talked about getting people off the street, obviously, not literally, but generally we're paying those people to come and play the game.
Yeah.
And the behavior difference of that compared to, say, the first 30 people that you get who are nothing to do with you and seeing how they play a game, those are very different types of questions that you're asking and different responses that you're getting.
Yeah.
In fact, I use a method that I discovered in the food industry that was designed by Pillsbury and NASA to feed the astronauts. It's called HACCP, Hazard Analysis and Critical Control Points. It's just a fancy way of saying we look at the flow of the user journey and we use that to decide what are the points of data we can capture and what are the expected results. And then we use that knowledge to test. Now, I mean, do you guys have particular processes and routines that you look to do to, ways that inform your thinking? Jasmin, when you're looking at kind of assessing a game, do you have a particular model that you work to?
Well, first, it really depended on where we were in production. Is it a live game? Are we in early production? Are we just about to wrap up? There are very different ways to do games user research and to validate, depending on where you are. Like currently, I'm in very, very early production. So we do a lot of audience research and work with data like from Funday, which is more about motivation models and understanding what kind of features we are crafting and what we set out to do and map them against that we are doing the right things. But when it came to live games, definitely, there is actually, again, it's a vast array of tools within that you can use. I did surveys, so and also I had players over for interviews. So it's like a mix of qualitative and quantitative data. And just as you say, we were of course looking at either the lifetime or of a specific part of the user's flow, within that. And depending on that, it also we negotiated, okay, what is the best way to find out about them? Like, qualitative data or like, user interviews we were doing, for example, for really end game players who've played a really long time and we really wanted to understand. They were extremely involved into social gameplay and we really wanted to understand, okay, what is it that they truly care about within those kind of social circles. So we felt like, okay, the best is that we sit really next to them and can ask them about certain things. While maybe for early game, it's more useful to, look at quantitative data and like to just measure and see, okay, for a bigger sample of people, how is the experience of this part of the game? And then depending on that, come up with solutions of, either, changing certain balancing, changing something there or introducing, features to, maybe make the journey a bit easier for them and keep them.
So it sounds like what you're saying to me is that there's a lot of thought experimenting that's at the early stages. I mean, we might have a persona that we say, okay, it's this type of personality, or we might use something like the Game Refinery. We've got a bunch of personas that you use. There are other companies doing that. I find that one particularly useful. But then as we go on through the development cycle of the game, it sounds like what you're saying is we're refining and we're kind of replacing our thought experiment with an actual piece of evidence. Is that a fair point?
Yeah, and it's an always ongoing and iterative thing. I mean, we are learning, every day. It's not something that stays static. It's like, okay, today we are going to try this, and you get a new kind of data. But yeah, definitely, and that depends also on the company, the kind of game that you are making, and the culture of what kind of approaches you take and what you see is most useful to you. It's as was mentioned already before, it's the team finding the approach also, what works for them.
So Emil, I mean, for you, is there a particular formula, and does it also change for you at different stages of the development process?
Yes, I think Jasmin touched on a ton of different points. I think one of the starting points I think is worth looking at, something that Jasmin mentioned at the end of her speech, right, was culture. and how important that is, because you can bring all the data in the world to the team or to the studio, but it depends on who is the team, who is the studio that you're bringing this data to, and do they trust Quantic Foundry as a data source? Do they trust a YouTuber playing their game more than when you pinpoint? You can find hundreds of data points. Saying, like, looking at a heat map is a great example, right? Like that is a very clear problem and a very clear solution.
Yeah.
More often than not, it's not as easy as that. But take the heat map, for example. You can bring out a heat map and say, we might have a problem here, but maybe it's not tangible or painfully tangible enough for the level designer until he sees a video of a streamer playing the game and failing to progress in the game. So I think it's always starts with establishing, as a studio or as a team, or preferably both, how you're going to approach data. How do you as a team want to work with the data that's coming in? And what data sources are you gonna work with? That doesn't mean that you as an individual on a team can't seek out new knowledge in the form of Discord, user surveys, or do focus group testing, or tons of other. We haven't done that.
It's not great, but it does. It has a point. It has a purpose.
Right, but I think it does speak. I really like Jasmin's point about the culture. Like that is going to be the starting point for every single data set you're going to get in. But it's also going to be very important in terms of, are you going to actually be able to act on the data that's coming in? Because you can get the biggest pile of data and just list after list of, like, we need to fix this, this, and that. But if the team you're working with don't understand how you got to that conclusion, you need to take 5 steps back, and you need to take them by the hand and take them on a journey, showing them, this is how I came to this conclusion. This is the data sources. This is the methodology that we're using to dig this stuff out. Because then they understand the journey of, like, how that data came from the game that they worked on, that they never, like, you always build it with the intention to get it right the first time, but you never do. So making sure that you sort of take them by the hand and show them, we're not saying you did something wrong, but it's not working the way we wanted it to. Let's work together as a team to fix that.
Well, that sounds like you need a culture of curiosity.
Yeah, I also think, like, our data analyst, for instance, Maya, she's a fantastic data analyst. She found a great article on Medium by Matthew Emery, who's previously been at Glue, who talked about, like, this method of setting up a grid of hypothetical features and the potential impact on LTV and the potential effort for that feature.
Yeah.
And by lining it up in a grid, it's not a NASA process, but it's a simple process where everyone can understand, I put in this much effort and we potentially get this much out. If you can get the team in a room together and agree on what's the effort, what's the potential win, then the next thing that you go in your team backlog becomes very evident. But again, like, that process makes sense for us right now where we are, because we're a live product. It was vastly different when we were in early access, and it was, again, vastly different when we moved from early access to to early access to soft launch, and then from soft launch to live ops. So Jasmin's point about sort of what phase are you in and what data do you need is, I can't applaud that enough. That's 100% on point.
Yeah, exactly. And to sort of dig down a little bit further on that, it sounds to me like the further we are, the earlier we are, the more qualitative we want information.
So,
and the later
sometimes,
we are, generally, the more quantitative we need.
Sometimes, yeah.
Yeah.
It depends, right? It depends on how big of a game are you building. Are you building a game that you can kick out the door in a week and test it on a wider audience? Do it. Don't hold back.
Hyper-casual.
And if it should always feel bad, like, when you're sending something out into the world, it should feel a little bit bad when you're sending it out, which is an indicator that you're just pushing the envelope enough, right? You shouldn't feel comfortable like, this is going to work perfectly, because then it never does. But getting to that conclusion earlier is going to be a benefit. But it depends on who can you reach first. If you don't have a developer license, pull in people from the street. If you do have a developer license and can ship your game on Google Play tomorrow, do it. Don't hold back. You can always relaunch the game with new art assets or under another name. That's fine.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of people talking about real data really makes a huge difference. And getting the real data early and fast, I think, matters. I mean, Miloš, do you agree with kind of the phrases, or anything you think haven't said?
Absolutely. Because from my experiences, there is only a few situations when you can decide based on data, like 100%. This is the winner. This can be used used in our game in future. But otherwise, it's combination. And what I really like is this combination where you look to data, and also you are checking the soft feedback and combining together. And also, Emil was very right in a way that you have to understand who to talk to in your team, because this is combination of the guys and put things together. And I really like. I think Mark Pincus said this once when he was asked about Zynga, and they are so data driven, and he answered someone like something like that data are good to rise next better question and never give you straight answer. And I really like that, because it's basically like deep diving, more understanding what you are doing, if you are following your vision. This is much more about data. There is no like A/B test. It's only a few times when you can decide based on this. And what I really like, and I believe, especially in PvP games and all this esport genre, and you mentioned it, Oscar, is this data which are used also to players back. Then players can improve their strategies and look to result of the matches and statistic of the heroes, etc. This is other part of the data. And here in Geewa, I'm comparing what we are doing in PvP games with sport, and look to sport, how they develop their strategies based on statistics, like Premier League in soccer. It's amazing, and I think this will come and slightly it's visible already in esports, in our genre, in PvP games.
Yeah, I think that's kind of interesting. I mean, particularly this idea that the questions we ask in data are to ask more questions, and being able to find that balance between, from a questioning point of view, whether we're asking someone's opinion or whether we're asking to see what their behavior is. When I'm trying to help people with live ops, I'm looking at audience sentiment, not just in terms of what they say, but also be able to measure that against what they actually do in the game. I'm interested in seeing what the market, outside of this game, what that's the general sentiment is there or around games of that genre, and also then to be able to compare the data performance of the particular game I'm helping or the nearest equivalent. I think it's always for me about finding this balancing point between emotion and factual behavior, but somehow manage to find a way to get that back to the original vision of what design the game was about. I think if you lose track of the original vision, you generally break the game. I mean, Max, I mean, does that make sense to you? Does that fit with the way you think?
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to it's a great point, mate. And, everyone basically took all the great answers. So thank you, guys. You just left me with nothing. Appreciate it. No, but like what you mentioned there, Oscar, mate, goes back to the original question that you first asked on this when this panel starts. Is like, how much do we trust data? How much do we give to data? How much do we give into our design to data? And that's the balancing act, because like we mentioned there, that we're looking at these systems, we're looking at this feedback. What is it telling us? Is it raising more questions? And then sometimes it might raise questions and you're like, I don't want to ask them anymore because I've got some kind of indication of where we need to go, and that's where we need to press forward. But it's always funny, especially in games, because we all start originally like on a paper design or in our heads or on some way before it touches a computer. And what it always finds out, and I'm sure we've all experienced it, is the fact that what you think is going to work doesn't always work necessarily or translate well. And that's the toughest part. But because of that, getting player feedback, testing, through all of this, you eventually find out that, okay, it might not work like this, but it raises the questions and also the inspiration to be like, oh, okay, well, actually, let's try it this way, and I can still reflect on the term of design. So it's that balancing act, like we've mentioned at the start. It's always about trying to make sure that it answers the questions and asks the right questions for you to keep.
To me, it comes back to the quote that's always attributed to Henry Ford, I think apocryphally, that if I asked people what they wanted, they'd have said a faster horse. Whether he did or not say that, it doesn't matter. The point is that knowing what we can realistically ask people, and what the data actually means, I think is often something we don't talk about. And I think to Milos's point, we talk about A/B testing all the time, but A/B testing is not the whole of data. It is a really important part, missed by lots of people, like to Jasmin's point earlier, but it's also part of a journey of us, using the senses available to us as a game developer, which is, what do people say? What do people do?
That's it. And there's that other famous quote, which is like, you tell people what they want. Like it's on us all sat here at the end of the day to believe in why we've chosen to make the games that we've worked on, to follow the ideas. And like, we believe that there's something is there. Like, we might have to refine it, smooth out the edges, but we've got to march on with the visions that we all choose on here today.
So another one of my theories is that not only do we have to pay attention to the life cycle of the game, so where we are in terms of production, pre-production, early access, I mean, depending on whether you're PC or mobile, whether you're doing soft launches or live, and ongoing live stages. I also think we need to take into account the life cycle of the player. And to me, that's part of cohort analysis. Understanding the difference between someone who's just discovered the game, whether they're going through the learning stage, how the game fits into their daily routine or not, and then the people who are engaged, maybe even super engaged, even those people are about to lapse, so how you re-engage stage, I like to call it, or if they're churned. I think actually asking people different questions depending on where they are, I think is more informative. At least that's my way of doing it. Do you have a way of looking at audiences? How do you split up the types of people you're asking information from? Jasmin, do you have a thought on that?
Yeah, at my last company where I worked on live games, we worked with audience segmentation, for example. And again, I can just say that culture is really important at this point, because it's so many different disciplines that need to work on that. Because what we are talking about is all the primary and secondary, game systems, all the game mechanics, the loops, and refining these kind of, the economy and everything that is going on, because that is part of the flow. So, game design, analytics, product manager, and UX need to really closely work together. And, one of the things that we did that I thought was really useful was audience segmentation, depending on specific parts of the game. We wanted to try to figure out how, and this is exactly the kind of life cycle thing, how do players transition within, to different either, play modes, or, become interested in other features and therefore mature within the game. So we did a really, we basically looked into that with the data analysts, and they did, I have to say, they did do all the work. I always feel like, okay, I am there and I help to drive and I get informed about the process, but they are, and this is something I really can also only recommend to everyone, have people there who are in charge of that and to help drive and find out about the things. But they really took a deep dive and informed us about, okay, this is what we found out, what do you guys think does this mean? And we found exactly that there are specific points that players, churned heavily, and they didn't transition to, other elements of the game that we thought, where we wanted them to go at least. So then we could start looking, what are the, problems in the flow? Where do players get stuck? And often it was, really simple game design decisions, just in balancing, to tweak a little bit, just to be able to level up a little bit earlier and have something available that would help players to transition.
Okay, so those transition points, I think, they're really vital kind of areas, and it's interesting kind of looking at a game in that basis. Emil, do you have any kind of particular tricks, techniques you do in terms of looking at kind of the player themselves?
Yeah, I would say it starts with a decent attribution platform. You need to know where your users are coming in from and who they are. At least to the point where a player who found our game while we were in early access did behave vastly differently than they did when we soft launched it. And to some parts, we actually based some of our decisions based on, less than ideal data. The only way we discovered that was by turning on user acquisition and acquiring users in via paid acquisition rather than just the organics, because the people on Google Play, God bless their souls, who find your game via the beta part of the Google Play tab are not like any other Google Play players. So if we based our entire business strategy around sort of, oh wait, you know, great numbers throughout, then we're basing it on like a tiny cohort of a special tiny cohort that we then extrapolate to say like these are all the players in the world. It's really important to be able to take apart the top of funnel data, because that has a trickle down effect throughout your entire analytics stack and your entire engagement stack. If you base, so I would start there always and be aware that the players who find your game while you're in early access are not likely to be your you know, global audience.
I remember consulting on a game that had Cristiano Ronaldo name backing it, and almost every single user that came through his tweets were useless. utterly appallingly bad. Yeah, so it was. I mean, I don't want to criticize him as a person.
No, but yeah. That's a great point, right? Like you would think that people who like Ronaldo and are on Twitter might also like, but that turns out that's not the case. Like his reach and the audience he had on Twitter were not a great match. I'm sure there's a great match for people who like Ronaldo and like mobile games, but that was the wrong channel to capture them, right?
Exactly.
And that's a good finding, but it would be a terrible way to base the value of the game itself on. So
it was heartbreaking for the client. That's all I can tell you.
yeah, but because that's likely part of the deal, right? I've worked with licensing before, so that is heartbreaking. But I would definitely say like top of funnel, start there. And also another tool is cluster analysis, because it helps you work out stuff you're not smart enough to ask yourself. So churn out some data and see where players clustering based on, are they engaging more with the game, and then see, okay, let's split that up into clusters and see why are they engaging more with the game. Are they playing a specific game mode more? Are they playing a specific map more? Are they playing with a specific gun more? Are they more social than others? Because then that helps you understand your users better, and it doesn't force you to try and work out why they're doing what they're doing. It lets the players answer for themselves basically through data.
Makes sense. Miloš, so what do you have a particular view on this?
Again, I fully agree with guys. It's on the beginning we are looking to this interest group who is our player of our games. After that, mostly this funnels and cohorts. But what is for us crucial data decisions are around balancing and matchmaking, because this is for PvP, like never-ending story, and you optimize and balance on the way. And it's really interesting, because basically you fight with few things. You have people which are on the beginning of their journey in game, on the end, these top players, and you have different liquidity in different time zones. And of course, simplest solution is put in place some bots, some players which are controlled by computer, and this is really like interesting environment to find way forward. And what works for us, because we have still this like ambition, we as a sport, that be very transparent, and if there are players bots, then we are saying this to players, then fully understand, okay, I'm playing against bot, and don't wait for the match for next 30 seconds, I can play immediately. Then there is this specific for PvP genre, and it's interesting thing, fine balance. And of course, how I'm saying to the guys here, some form of unbalance is healthy, because people looking for new strategies, new ways, how be better in the game, and this is healthy stuff. But huge disbalance, of course, cause problem.
Well, it's always looking for exploits with PvP. I mean, it's kind of part of the fun is how to break the game. So running data analysis at the same time as having enough space for people to explore what the game can do. Oh, that's a toughie. It's fun, but it's what makes making games like that so much fun. But it is tough.
Yeah, and now we are solving issue with clans, which give this to other dimension, because you have, of course, top clans which combine top players, but this standard clans combine players from like different times of lifetime of the players. And it's a huge challenge for designers, for us, and we are using data for our decisions, be smarter in our predictions very, very heavily.
It's a tough one. I mean, I'll bore you another time about a mod called Weapon of Choice, which basically try to self-balance Quake so that newbies could play experienced players. That just a way to make sure you don't break critical mass in a game like that is so tough. So Max, what about yourself? Any particular tools and techniques that you want to share with us?
I just disagree with everyone. I'm going to spice it up and just say it, no, just throw some spice in. No, I mean, everyone's kind of covered kind of what, I'd say, but worded it way better. But I guess it just, again, it all comes back down to just like know who you're designing for. Like if you're designing a sequel as well, you're probably going to go more to your existing player base versus a new IP, and understanding that, it's a big thing for it. But no, like, everyone stole the words again, guys. Thank you. I appreciate it. I'm going to disagree for my next one. I promise you. But,
well, I'm going to kick off the last question with
I'll
you.
disagree for the last one now.
Excellent.
It's wrong.
So
everything's wrong.
Off this one. So what's the one tool or technique that you think anyone who wants to use data to improve their design should do?
All right, geez. Throw me the hard one.
I'll throw you the easy one, yeah.
That's a really good question there. For me, I think, especially just as a level designer, because as I said, we don't really get access to tools that's normally people, like I said, in Jasmin's or Emil's or Milos's positions to decide on what they are. But for me, the best thing I can say, especially as an LD, someone who's aspiring to get into the industry as an LD, is make sure that you do just get like player sessions in. Like, try not to bring your mum or your brother or your father in, obviously, because it'll be very biased, but do bring in, people to test your stuff and just sit there silently and just watch. It's the best tip I can give to young aspiring LDs. I know it's not technology, but just the simpleness of that can really help your levels there. So yeah.
I mean, for me, I think if I can not be in the room and I can observe them by camera or through a glass window,
yes,
and have somebody who has nothing to do with me introduce it to them. Anything that takes the user away from me,
yes,
the better the information I get out of it.
No, I agree. Like sometimes I'll come in partway through a test just so they don't know who I am or my relation, and just sit there. And it sounds weird saying it out loud, sit there and watch people, but for the sake of research, that's why we're there. So yeah,
because I can't help interfering, and as soon as I interfere, everything's easy, everything's great.
So you're doing it wrong. It's all your fault.
Yeah, exactly. Jasmin, what about yourself? So what's the sort of one tool or technique that you'd ask people to take away with you?
I have to come back to the culture thing. I just think, design culture is something that's often, just not maybe more recognized nowadays, but maybe still something that you will struggle with because, just as Emil said, it doesn't matter how much data you have available in what sets if you don't have the buy-in from your team, from your management. It's important, that to understand, why are things data-driven nowadays? And, as you guys mentioned in the start, it's not the single only source, and it doesn't give you answers per se, but it informs your decision. So I always thought that involving everyone just not only made people, gave people a chance to understand how we do things, but also gave them a chance to participate. And, in the end, that is what we do. We hire people who are, most often smarter than us and to be involved in what we're doing, no matter the position, So culture. And, but I really also appreciate definitely the points that Max made about, it's really hard even for senior designers to not tell people in the room how to interact with things. It's really a challenging thing, no matter how experienced you are. So it's always good to remind yourself and the team, how can we remove ourselves from this so that we are not leading people?
Yeah, absolutely. Emil?
Yeah, I would say think very carefully about what phase your product is in and set clear goals for whatever KPIs you need to set to make sure that you leave that phase at the right time. It's okay if the KPI goals feels uncomfortable. That means that you set it right. but you really need to think long and hard around what KPI goals you need to set. That also forces you to have a frank discussion with your management team, studio execs around, is this the right time and what's the expected time frame to reach that goal? Because then there's clear KPIs, and you can also start to have a frank discussion around what do we need to prove at each each cycle of the product life cycle. And yeah, 100% agree with Max. It's terrifying watching people take your game apart. One of the things that we've done is when we go out, we always open with saying we're testing this for another studio. We didn't make this. That means that it's easier for us to sort of be in an arm's length. We come clean, of course, by the end, but yeah. But I would say, like, really think around what stage your production is in, and make sure that that's aligned and the expectations are aligned with your management and your team, and of course, like the data itself.
Like being stabbed in the heart, but you've got to invite it and you've got to want it.
Yeah.
Miloš.
I think best technique for people in gaming industry is playing games, and I think this includes also guys from BI, and frankly, best hires which we did to Geewa were exactly like guys who sit down, play game, and look to what was generated in data and start understanding and connecting these dots. And I think reconstruction also is something what is really, really useful, looking to other games and learn from it, how they build, what you think works for you as a player. This combining with playtesting, again, Max was very right in that. It's exactly daily life, and balancing, looking to the data and this player experience, emotions, which you have behind game as a player. It's something very useful, and the guys who like understand that on the beginning are most valuable one.
There's a line that Stephen King has in On Writing, which says, you're not a writer if you're not writing 2 hours a day and reading 2 hours a day. And I think the same thing applies to game development. If you're not playing 2 hours a day and designing 2 hours a day, you're not a game designer. And I'd add to that, if we're not taking data in that design, we're not a game designer either. But then I'm being a bit unfair on that. I mean, if I was going to give one bit of advice, the biggest lesson I learned was actually just knowing what question you were asking and asking a consistent group of people that question. So looking at people from the point of view of like day one of them starting to play. So if I compare responses from people who've had the same number of days playing the game, I'm going to get much more useful answers than if I just ask a blanket group of people. I need a common starting point. Otherwise, I don't understand who the players I'm talking to are. So that's us. I think we're out of time. I don't know if there are any questions. Hey, Martin. Hopefully we haven't gone over too much. Thanks very much, guys. I think you did an amazing job. And Martin, over to you.
Thanks so much for the great panel. Yeah, I mean, we're a little bit over time, but that doesn't matter because you were the last panel of the morning sessions.
Did I know that?